1:22 a.m. Naval Base Kitsap-Bangor, Washington State. 47 degrees north latitude, 122 degrees west longitude. The base sits on the Hood Canal, a narrow fjord extending southwest from Puget Sound. Its geographic position, 30 kilometers west of Seattle, accessible from the Pacific through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, made it the Pacific Fleet's primary ballistic missile submarine home port. At 1:22 a.m., 8 Ohio-class SSBNs were at various stages of readiness at Kitsap-Bangor's Strategic Weapons Facility Pacific. 4 were in refit cycles with their missile tubes emptied for maintenance. Their Trident II D5 missiles transferred to the weapons storage facility ashore. Their crews on leave rotation, their reactor plants in cold iron. These 4 were not part of the operational deterrent equation. They were scheduled maintenance, not deployed capability. 2 were at modified refit status, their missile loads intact, but their crews at 72-hour recall readiness rather than immediate readiness. They could sortie within 6 hours of an order being issued, assuming their crews could be assembled, their systems activated, and the Hood Canal cleared for departure. 2 were at Alert 5 readiness. All 24 Trident II D5 missiles loaded and certified. Crews aboard. Reactor plants in full operational status. These 2 boats could be underway in approximately 30 minutes from a departure order. Each carried 24 Trident II D5 missiles, each missile carrying between 8 and 14 MIRV warheads. 48 Trident II D5 missiles, between 384 and 672 nuclear warheads, moored at a fixed, known, precisely surveyed position on the Hood Canal. The plan's targeting cell had been building the Kitsap-Bangor strike package for 9 years. Every element of the base's layout, every berth assignment pattern, every departure timing correlation between Alert 5 readiness declarations and subsequent sortie events had been analyzed from commercial satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and open-source maritime traffic data. The 2 Alert 5 boats' positions on the waterfront were known to within 15 meters. The torpedo loading wharf, the Strategic Weapons Facility Pacific's primary building, and the communications relay infrastructure that connected the base to the submarine force's ELF broadcasting network were all cataloged in the targeting database. The strike package had been designed around one operational calculation. The 2 Alert 5 boats needed to be engaged within their 30-minute sortie window. After 30 minutes, they would be underway. After 60 minutes, they would be at depth. After 90 minutes, they would be beyond any targeting solution available from a ground-based weapon. The window was 30 minutes from the first indication that a departure order had been issued. The plan had built a strike package designed to arrive within that window. The delivery system: 4 DF-41 ICBMs from the 96th Missile Brigade at Nanyang, Henan Province. The DF-41 has a range of 14,000 kilometers and a flight time to the continental United States of approximately 30 minutes on a depressed trajectory. From Nanyang to Kitsap-Bangor, 8,700 kilometers. Flight time on a standard trajectory, approximately 24 minutes. Flight time on a precision depressed trajectory optimized for accuracy over speed, approximately 27 minutes. The DF-41's designation as a precision counterforce weapon rather than a city-targeting area weapon was reflected in its payload configuration for this strike. Not the maximum multiple warhead loading, but a single high-yield warhead per missile. A 500 kiloton device whose circular error probable of approximately 100 meters made it a weapon designed to hit a specific geographic coordinate, not to maximize casualty area. 4 missiles, 4 500 kiloton warheads, 4 aim points within the Kitsap-Bangor waterfront complex. This was not a strategic nuclear exchange in the standard deterrence framework's definition. It was a decapitation strike against the U.S. nuclear deterrent's most survivable element, not to destroy the nuclear arsenal, which was distributed across the submarine force at sea, the ICBM fields, and the bomber fleet, but to destroy the specific portion of that arsenal that was at a fixed, known location and that could be eliminated before it dispersed. Eliminating 2 Alert 5 SSBNs at berth removed between 384 and 672 warheads from the U.S. Second Strike inventory. It did not remove the Second Strike. It reduced it. In the plan's strategic calculation, a reduced U.S. Second Strike, combined with the operational window created by the disruption of U.S. decision-making that a strike on U.S. soil would produce, was assessed as changing the escalation calculus in a manner that favored the operation's political objectives. The political objectives were not the destruction of the United States. They were the establishment of a condition under which the U.S. government would choose to accept a Chinese fait accompli in the Taiwan Strait, rather than escalate further. This was the most dangerous calculation in the scenario series, not because it was irrational, because it was coherent. 1:22 a.m. SBIRS Processing Center, Buckley Space Force Base, Colorado. The DF-41 launch signatures appeared at 1:22 a.m. 4 simultaneous thermal events from the Nanyang area of Henan Province, consistent with DF-41 first stage ignition. The SBIRS correlation engine processed 4 confirmed ICBM launches in 0.6 seconds. The notification reached NORAD, Strategic Command, and the White House Situation Room at 1:22 a.m. The trajectory assessment followed in 41 seconds. At 1:22 a.m., NORAD had 4 confirmed ICBM trajectories with projected impact points. All 4 trajectories converged on the Pacific Northwest region of the continental United States. The highest confidence impact point overlay: Kitsap-Bangor Naval Base. Not Seattle. Not a population center. A naval base. The classification of the inbound trajectories as a counterforce strike rather than a counter-value strike, military target versus population center, was operationally significant in one specific way. The U.S. Nuclear Response Authorization Chain's protocols distinguished between a nuclear strike on a military target and a strike on a city. The distinction existed because the policy framework for how to respond to a limited nuclear strike on a military installation was different from the policy for a strike on a city. The distinction was real. The authorization process for the military target response was different. It took longer. The NORAD battle commander had the trajectory assessment at 1:22 a.m. She had 24 minutes before the first warhead arrived. The GBI system at Fort Greely was the available intercept tool. Its engagement geometry against DF-41 trajectories approaching from the west on a northwest to southeast approach vector was within its designed operational envelope. Unlike the orbital threshold scenario, where the southern approach had been outside the GBI's coverage arc, a Chinese ICBM from Henan Province to Washington State followed a northwest approach that was exactly the arc Fort Greely's radar and interceptors had been positioned to cover. 4 DF-41 trajectories, 4 warheads, 4 GBI intercept assignments. The GBI engagement authorization was requested at 1:22 a.m., 10 seconds after the trajectory assessment. The authorization chain required presidential confirmation for nuclear-class intercept operations against a confirmed nuclear threat. The president had been notified at 1:22 a.m. The confirmation was requested. At 1:23 a.m., 38 seconds after the launches, the authorization was confirmed. Fastest presidential authorization in GBMD engagement history. The president had been in continuous elevated readiness since the Taiwan Strait operation had begun 16 days earlier. Fort Greely began launching GBIs at 1:24 a.m. The GBI system had 44 operational interceptors. The engagement protocol for a 4-warhead package assigned 4 GBIs per warhead in the initial salvo. A commitment of 16 interceptors, providing multiple engagement opportunities per target. The remaining 28 GBIs were in reserve for second-cycle engagement or for additional threats. The 16 GBI launches were executed over a 4-minute window beginning at 1:24 a.m. The engagement geometry for each GBI was solved by the fire control system against the DF-41's mid-course phase at altitudes above the atmosphere. The 4 warheads were in their ballistic coast phase, following predictable trajectories without terminal maneuvering capability. The DF-41, unlike the DF-ZF, was a ballistic missile. Its trajectory was Newtonian. The GBI's kill vehicle, once on its intercept trajectory, was solving an orbital mechanics problem against a target whose position could be predicted with confidence. Against a predictable ballistic target at operational range, with 4 independent intercept opportunities per warhead, the GBI's modeled combined engagement probability per warhead was 91% based on the test program's performance data. 91% per warhead across 4 independent warheads. Combined probability that all 4 were intercepted, approximately 68%. 32% probability that at least 1 warhead reached its target. The first GBI kill vehicle reached the intercept point against warhead Alpha 1 at 1:34 a.m. Direct intercept. Alpha 1 neutralized. The second GBI against Alpha 1 was in flight as a backup. It was redirected to Alpha 2's assignment queue by the fire control system when Alpha 1's neutralization was confirmed. Alpha 2, the first GBI assigned, neutralized the warhead at 1:35 a.m. The redirected backup GBI was no longer needed for Alpha 2 and was reassigned to Alpha 3. Alpha 3, the first GBI missed. The kill vehicle passed 340 meters from the warhead, a miss that the fire control system's post-intercept assessment attributed to a wind gradient at 110 kilometers altitude that the targeting solution had not fully accounted for. The second GBI, originally assigned to Alpha 3, intercepted at 1:36 a.m. The redirected backup from Alpha 2 was no longer needed for Alpha 3. Alpha 4, the first GBI assignment, achieved intercept at 1:37 a.m. Direct hit, 4 warheads, 4 intercepts. All 4 neutralized. 0 reached Kitsap-Bangor. The U.S. nuclear deterrent at the base was intact. The 2 Alert 5 SSBNs were still moored at the waterfront. At 1:38 a.m., 1 minute after the last intercept was confirmed, both Alert 5 submarines received their emergency departure orders simultaneously. The departure orders had been generated at 1:22 a.m., the moment the SBIRS notification had been transmitted. They had been held in a pre-generated format, needing only final authorization, which had been provided at 1:23 a.m. simultaneously with the GBI engagement authorization. The boats were underway at 1:52 a.m., 30 minutes from the departure order. The Hood Canal was cleared by the base's maritime security element in 12 minutes. Both submarines submerged in the Strait of Juan de Fuca at 2:31 a.m. At depth, moving, their positions unknown. The 30-minute window the plan had designed its strike around. The warheads had been intercepted. The window had closed without the warheads arriving. The boats had departed anyway. The U.S. nuclear deterrent that had been at Kitsap-Bangor at 1:22 a.m. was now at an unknown position in the Pacific Ocean. The planned strike had failed to destroy the targeted assets. It had succeeded in one operational consequence it had not specifically designed for. The departure of both Alert 5 submarines meant that Kitsap-Bangor was now an empty target. Any follow-on strike against the base would hit infrastructure, not the deterrent. The deterrent was dispersed. It could not be targeted again. The 4 DF-41s that had been fired were gone. The 96th Missile Brigade at Nanyang had expended 4 of its assigned DF-41 capacity against targets that had survived the strike and departed. The follow-on strike planning that the plan had prepared as a contingency against the Alert 5 submarines not having departed before impact now had no valid targets. The bases the submarines had occupied were empty. The submarines themselves were at an unknown position in 47 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. The strategic calculation that had made the strike coherent, that eliminating the Alert 5 boats would reduce the U.S. second strike inventory and change the escalation calculus, had been defeated by the GBI system achieving 4 intercepts in 4 minutes. The President's response decision was the most consequential of this engagement series. 4 nuclear weapons had been launched against U.S. territory. All 4 had been intercepted. U.S. territory had not been struck. U.S. military assets had not been physically damaged. 2 U.S. nuclear submarines that had been targeted were now at sea and could not be recalled. They had departed under orders that were not rescindable until they reached their patrol depths and checked in on their communications schedule. The U.S. nuclear deterrent had been attacked. It had survived. The attack had been defeated. What followed was a presidential decision that existed in a space no doctrine had fully mapped. A confirmed Chinese nuclear strike against U.S. territory, intercepted before impact, with 0 physical damage to U.S. assets, at a moment when the Taiwan Strait situation remained unresolved, and the U.S. military was engaged in multiple simultaneous operations in the Western Pacific. The nuclear response options were being presented to the President at 1:44 a.m. The conventional military response options were being presented simultaneously. The Chinese government's crisis hotline communication, received at 1:31 a.m., 9 minutes after the launches, before the intercepts had been confirmed, had framed the strike as a limited counterforce demonstration designed to communicate the consequences of continued U.S. military engagement in the Taiwan Strait. The framing was explicit. This was not an attempt to eliminate the U.S. nuclear deterrent. It was a signal about what would follow if U.S. military operations in the Western Pacific continued. The intercepts had been confirmed at 1:37 a.m. The Chinese government's communication had been transmitted before the PLAN knew whether the GBI system would succeed. The communication was not a post hoc explanation of a successful strike. It was a preemptive framing of an operation whose outcome was uncertain. That uncertainty, whether the Chinese government had known the strike would be intercepted, or had gambled that it would not be, was the critical intelligence question at 1:44 a.m. If the strike was designed to be intercepted, if the framing as a demonstration was genuine, and the plan had not expected to destroy the submarines, then the operation was a nuclear signal designed to test U.S. resolve without accepting the consequences of actual nuclear employment on U.S. territory. If the strike had been designed to succeed, and the interception was an outcome the plan had not expected, then the operation was a failed nuclear first use against U.S. territory, and the U.S. response decision had to account for the capability that had been demonstrated rather than the outcome that had been achieved. The intelligence community's assessment at 1:44 a.m. inconclusive. Insufficient data to determine intent. The missiles had been real. The warheads had been real. The impact points had been computed. The assessment of whether the plan believed the GBI system would succeed was not resolvable from available intelligence in 22 minutes. The President had both response packages in front of him at 1:44 a.m. The conventional military response. Expanded strike authorization against PLARF infrastructure across multiple provinces. This was available under existing War Powers Authority for the defense of U.S. forces and territory. The nuclear response. Activation of U.S. strategic nuclear forces under the Nuclear Employment Options Framework. This required the President's sole authority. At 1:53 a.m., the President authorized the conventional military response package. The nuclear employment options were not activated. The authorization transmitted to Strategic Command at 1:53 a.m. directed the expansion of Operation Steel Meridian's scope to include PLARF strategic missile infrastructure beyond the Fujian coast. The interior sites that had housed the 96th Missile Brigade's DF-41 capacity, now reduced by 4 expended missiles. Specifically, the infrastructure that supported reload and reconstitution, the warhead storage facilities, the mobile launch vehicle maintenance complexes, and the command nodes that coordinated the Strategic Missile Force's operations. B-2 strikes against the Nanyang area infrastructure were authorized. Virginia-class submarine Tomahawk packages were activated. The scale of the conventional response had expanded. At 1:58 a.m., the 2 Alert 5 SSBNs checked in on their departure communications window from 200 meters depth in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Both were confirmed combat effective. Both received the updated strategic situation brief. Both acknowledged and continued their transit to patrol depth. They would not be contacted again until their scheduled communications window on the patrol cycle. At 2:04 a.m., the first B-2J SSBNs strikes impacted the Nanyang Launch Complex infrastructure. The DF-41 TEL maintenance facility, the warhead transfer building, and the launch site access road network were engaged. The 96th Missile Brigade's above-ground support infrastructure was being systematically engaged. The DF-41s that remained in the 96th Brigade's inventory were in their underground storage positions. The JASSMER could engage surface infrastructure. Underground storage required GBU-57 from B2, authorized and en route for the second wave strike package. The Nanyang complex's underground launch positions, hardened to the same standard as US ICBM silos, were not first strike targets in a conventional military response authorization. Their engagement would require the President to authorize a strike against facilities that might contain armed nuclear weapons. The second authorization was requested at 2:09 a.m. It was pending at 2:31 a.m. when both SSBNs submerged in the Pacific. Time from DF-41 launch detection to presidential engagement authorization, 1 minute. Time from engagement authorization to first GBI launch, 1 minute. Time from first GBI launch to last. Confirmed intercept, 13 minutes. Time from SBIRS notification to SSBN emergency departure order, 30 seconds. Time from departure order to both SSBNs submerged, 69 minutes. Chinese systems employed. 4 DF-41 ICBMs from 96th Missile Brigade, Nanyang. Payload, 1 × 500 kiloton warhead per missile. Aim points, Kitsap-Bangor waterfront SSBN berthing positions. GBI engagement results, 16. GB is launched in 4 warhead intercept package. Alpha 1, intercepted first attempt. Alpha 2, intercepted second attempt. First GBI reassigned from Alpha 1 backup. Alpha 3, first GB, I missed 340 meters. Second GB, I intercept achieved. Alpha 4, intercepted first attempt. All 4 warheads neutralized. Physical damage to Kitsap-Bangor, 0. Alert 5 SSBNs, underway and submerged, positions unknown, combat effective. U.S. nuclear deterrent at Kitsap-Bangor at time of strike, departed. Current status, 47 million square kilometers of Pacific Ocean. GBI intercept cost, $148 million. U.S. territory physical damage, 0. U.S. nuclear capability eliminated, 0. Presidential response authorized. Conventional military expansion of Steel Meridian against PLARF infrastructure. Nuclear employment, not authorized. Underground storage facility strike. Authorization pending. The plan had launched 4 nuclear missiles against U.S. territory. The plan had communicated a framing of this as a signal, not a first strike, before the outcome was known. The GBI system had answered both possibilities simultaneously. It had intercepted the warheads regardless of whether they were a signal or a strike, and it had done so in 13 minutes, from a standing start, against 4 warheads in the most operationally significant counterforce targeting scenario in the GBI system's history. The submarines were in the Pacific. The warheads were debris falling into the Pacific from 120 to 140 kilometers altitude. The plan's calculation had been coherent. The U.S. defensive architecture had been sufficient. The margin, this time, had not been measured in fractions of degrees or kilometers of misdistance. It had been measured in time. 24 minutes of flight time, 16 GBI launches in 4 minutes, 4 intercepts in 13 minutes, and 30 seconds between SBIRS notification and departure orders to the boats that were the actual targets. 30 seconds. The margin between the deterrent intact and the deterrent reduced had been the 30 seconds between detection and departure authorization. The departure orders had been pre-generated. They had been waiting for a single authorization code. The authorization code had been provided at 1:23 a.m., simultaneously with the GBI engagement authorization. One action. Two consequences. The boats were in the Pacific. The legacy was in the timing.